Nobody asked the girl in a wheelchair to dance. They walked past her like a piece of architecture, the gala-goers in their silver and ink, their borrowed jewels catching the light of the Wexley Hotel's grand chandelier. And Iris Calloway, who had designed the sapphire at the throat of half the women in the room, sat at the foot of the ballroom staircase, with both hands folded in her lap, and watched the dance floor open like a tide. It was the second Saturday in April. The Spring Foundation Gala had been on her calendar for 9 weeks. She had built the centerpiece of the evening with her own hands, a 1923-cut Burmese sapphire, reset into a collar of blackened silver wire, commissioned by the Wexley Patron House to crown the keynote auction. And, she had told herself, sitting at her studio bench at 3 in the morning with the soldering iron cooling, that she would simply be there to watch the gem do its work. She had not told herself she would want anything else. The fact is, she did want something else. She wanted what every other woman in the room had been promised by the orchestra's first long inhalation. A hand, a step toward the floor, a movement that did not start with permission. She pressed the tip of her thumb against the brake lever of her chair and let the wanting pass through her like a held breath. Because the alternative was to look at the room and see herself the way the room saw her, which was as a person whose evening was already finished. A young woman in a navy gown leaned across her, reaching for a champagne flute from the side table. "Sorry," she murmured to no one in particular, and adjusted her gloves and disappeared. Iris counted 4 people who had walked through the small territory of her chair, as though it were a service aisle in the next 3 minutes. She did not count it as cruelty. She counted it as the architecture of attention. "More chandeliers, fewer chairs," a low voice said over her shoulder, dry as toast. "One of the great mysteries of philanthropy." Iris turned. Rosa Delacroix, the Wexley estate's longtime housekeeper, had come down from the upstairs reception in a black uniform that was a clearer statement of authority than half the silks on the floor. Rosa was 60 if she was a day, with grey at her temples and an expression that had been calibrated over 40 years to communicate exactly the right amount of polite skepticism to people who needed it. "Mrs. Delacroix," Iris said. "You came down." "Mm-hmm." Rosa surveyed the room and did not visibly disapprove of anything. "Mr. Wexley sent for the steward. I came instead. The steward would have argued with him." "Argued about what?" "That is a matter," Rosa said gently, "between Mr. Wexley and Mr. Wexley." Across the ballroom, a woman in a column of slate-gray silk was moving along the edge of the floor with the steady, low-voltage authority of someone who could empty a room with a sentence. Iris had been introduced to Delphine Marchetti Wexley exactly once, 3 months ago, in a meeting room with a long table and a glass of water she had not touched. Delphine had said, "One notes that your work has a certain unsentimental quality." And Iris had understood she was being offered a contract for the very reason another woman would have considered an insult. She had signed. Now Delphine cut across the parquet toward her with the same low-voltage walk, and Iris felt the back of her own neck cool. "Miss Calloway." Delphine stopped a careful arm's length from the chair. She touched the back of her left earring. "Forgive me. Would you ask one of the catering staff to widen this aisle? Several guests have struggled with the path." For a heartbeat, Iris could not pass the sentence. Then she did, and the heat of it landed at the hinge of her jaw and did not pass through. "The fact is, Mrs. Wexley," Iris said, "I'm not on the staff. I made the sapphire." Delphine's eyes did not change. The space behind her mouth changed by a millimeter. The smallest tell of a woman who corrected a misreading without admitting it had occurred. "Ah," she said. "Of course, you'll forgive me. The light is poor at the foot of these stairs. Rosa, would you fetch Miss Calloway a glass of something?" "Mrs. Wexley," Rosa said evenly. "Miss Calloway is not thirsty." The orchestra hit the first long phrase of the waltz the city's old families had danced to for a century. Couples assembled in the shallow blue lake of the floor. A man at Iris's left took a woman's hand and led her in. 2 girls, debutantes, Iris guessed, laughed and pulled their grandfathers toward the music. The room arranged itself around the geometry of partnership. and Iris was again the exception that proved the geometry. She watched the floor and did not look at Delphine. The wanting came back. She had been trained, by 19 years of legs and 8 years without them, to swallow it like a tablet. She swallowed it now. "Excuse me," a voice said. She did not look up immediately because she had stopped looking up at men's voices on principle. Her energy had a budget, and so she heard, before she saw, the rest of the sentence. "Would it be," the voice said, and the speaker reset, the way a person resets when they have rehearsed a question, and the rehearsal will not do. "I beg your pardon. May I have the next dance?" Iris looked up. Augustus Wexley was 33 years old, and the photograph of him on the back of Forbes that quarter had made him look like a man who answered to no one. In person, 2 feet from her chair, in a charcoal suit cut by someone who took the work seriously, he looked like a man answering, very specifically, to her. His right hand was open at his side. He had no glove. His palm was a pale rectangle in the chandelier's gold. "Mr. Wexley," she said. "Miss Calloway." "I am not—" She glanced at her chair, then at the parquet, then at the orchestra. "I don't—" "Forgive me." He took a breath. "I should not have phrased it that way. May I escort you to the floor?" "I know." The next sentence ought to have been a refusal. She had 4 ready. She had built them over years. The first was a joke, the second was a deflection, the third was a precise, scientific description of the mechanics of the chair, the fourth was a soft, dignified no that left the asker with their pride intact and herself without further conversation. He did not look like a man asking to fulfill a quota. He looked, oddly, like a man asking for himself. "On what terms?" she said. Behind him, Delphine had gone very still in her column of grey silk. Rosa had crossed her arms. The orchestra began the second movement of the waltz, slower, a long-held line that the old dancers in the room knew by its first half-beat. "Then carry me," Iris heard herself say. And it was not a sentence she had ever planned to speak out loud. And once it was out, the architecture of the room rearranged itself around her instead of in spite of her. "Carry me out to the middle of the floor. Then put me back where you found me when the song ends." Augustus Wexley did not say yes. He did not say anything at all. He bent, slowly enough that she had time to lift her arms, and one of his palms went to the place between her shoulder blades, and the other to the bend of her knees, and he lifted her out of the chair and into the light. She had not been carried in 8 years. The shock of it was not the height. The shock was the temperature of another person's chest through linen and silk. He smelled of cedar, and clean shirt starch, and, faintly, of mint. She found she had locked her hand around the lapel of his jacket, and could not remember telling her hand to do that. He walked her into the middle of the floor, at the pace of a man who had once carried someone he loved every evening up a staircase. And Iris, who had not known until that moment that there were ways of being carried that did not feel like rescue, allowed herself to be still. He did not put her down. He held her, both of them, in the simple, swaying half-step that the music permitted, and the parquet around them emptied without anyone deciding to leave. The waltz held a long-held note. Somewhere in the upper gallery a phone went off, then went silent. "You can put me back now," she said into his collar at the end of the first phrase. "I can," he said. "I will, if you tell me to." "I'm telling you to." He turned, very slowly, and walked her back to the foot of the staircase. He lowered her with the same care he had lifted her with, and her chair was exactly where she had left it, because Rosa Delacroix had set herself behind it like a sentry. He placed Iris into the seat and stepped back, and put both his hands behind his back like a schoolboy. He did not look at the room. "Thank you, Miss Calloway," he said. "Mr. Wexley," she said, because her voice had returned, and she would not lose it in front of him a second time. He bowed, half an inch, the only old-money concession he had made all evening, and walked off the floor through a corridor of staring faces and into the service hall beyond, and the orchestra started its third movement. and the dance resumed without them. Iris sat very still and felt her own pulse in the brake lever under her thumb. Behind her, Rosa said, almost too quietly to be heard, "Mm-hmm." Augustus Wexley did not come back to the gala. He went upstairs to the small office he kept on the 22nd floor of the Wexley Hotel and shut the door and stood at the window with both hands flat on the sill. The city below was a grid of yellow squares and slow lights. He did not turn around when the door opened behind him, because there was only one person in the hotel who entered his office without knocking, and he could not look at her yet. "Augustus," Delphine said. He closed his eyes. "Augustus, the keynote auction starts in 40 minutes. "I'll be down." "You will be down before then. You will be down for the photograph. You will speak about the preservation of the Saint-Hilaire, and you will smile at the board, and you will not." She paused. He could hear her composing the rest of the sentence. "You will not give that photograph a context." "What context?" He turned. Delphine was in the open doorway with one hand on the frame. She was 41, and she had been managing the public face of the Wexley name for the 11 years since his father's stroke, and she had, in the privacy of her own composure, never asked him for anything that was not already her job. He saw, with the clarity he had not had a minute earlier, that she was furious. "It was a dance," he said. "It was a photograph. There are 212 guests in that room with telephones. There are 9 reporters in the upstairs gallery. By morning, there will be a headline that includes the words wheelchair and billionaire and a verb of your choice. By Monday, the Preservation Board will reconvene, and they will use that headline as evidence. One notes that the Saint-Hilaire deal has rested on the board's confidence in our seriousness. One notes that you have just given the board a photograph that will be read as a stunt." It was not a stunt. Augustus. She came 2 steps into the office and stopped. Her hand went to the back of her left earring and stayed there. "I'm not asking you to explain it to me. I'm asking you to come downstairs." He looked at her. He looked at the window. He looked at the place on the desk where his mother's photograph had stood 11 years ago, before he had moved it to a drawer. "I will be down," he said. "Give me 10 minutes." Delphine inclined her head and left the door open behind her. He heard the soft, brisk percussion of her heels along the hall carpet until they stopped. He waited until the elevator chimed and the silence of his floor came back. Then he put his right palm flat on the desk and said his mother's name once, under his breath, the way he had not said it in any room since he was 14, and went downstairs. By Sunday morning, the photograph had a name. It was being called, on the gossip page of the city's smaller daily and on 3 different cultural blogs, The Carry. The first version had appeared at 6:43 the previous evening, taken from the upper gallery by someone with a long lens. In it, Augustus Wexley was a clean, dark line across the gold parquet, and Iris Calloway's pale arm was around his neck. Her face was not visible. The caption read, "Wexley Air ends waltz early. New muse or new mistake." Iris read it at her studio bench in Brooklyn at 6:12 in the morning, with 1 cup of strong coffee and the heater set low. Mara Vance stood behind her with a phone in one hand and a croissant in the other, and a very particular kind of stillness in her shoulders that Iris had learned, over 12 years of friendship, to translate as, "Do not look at me yet." "How many?" Iris said. 18 pickups, Mara said. 2 of them above the fold, 1 of them with your name spelled correctly. "That's a start." "It's a start of something." Mara set the croissant down. "Listen, the studio phone rang 6 times before I got here. 2 commission inquiries, 1 reporter, 1 condolence from your old professor, 1 from the broker on the Saint-Hilaire restoration tender." She paused. "And 1 from Augustus Wexley's chief of staff." Iris's thumb pressed against the brake lever of her chair, saying that Mr. Wexley wishes to offer the carriage house at the Westchester estate for the next 2 weeks. The press will calm down faster if you are not photographed in front of your shop window. The chief of staff used the word sanctuary. She also used the word compensation, which I told her to remove from her vocabulary, after which we got along very well. Don't Mara me. I made a list. The pros are that the country estate has a converted ground-floor carriage house with no thresholds, a heated stone path to the studio out back, a glass roof that is, and I quote her, appropriate for soldering work, and a kitchen run by a woman named Rosa, who I'm told would die for you on sight. The cons are that you would be sleeping 50 yards from a man who carried you across a ballroom last night, and the gossip page has named you. The pros are stronger. They also include the fact that the Preservation Board hearing for the Saint-Hilaire is in 12 days, and you have a tender to finish for them, and you cannot finish it with reporters in your driveway. Mara, I have not agreed to the tender. The fact is, Iris stopped. Mara had set both palms flat on the bench. Her hair was still half-pinned from the night before. She had been at the gala for 2 hours and had gone home in a town car at the same time as her own clients, which was, by Mara's standards, an admission of defeat. Iris, listen to me. He did not do anything wrong last night. He asked you. He asked you in front of the only people he is afraid of. He did what you told him to do, and he did not announce it on the way out. And I am telling you that I have looked at the contract for the tender, and I have looked at his chief of staff's email, and I've looked at the photograph. And the photograph is the only one of the 3 that worries me. So you are going to go to the country for 2 weeks, and you are going to finish the Saint-Hilaire piece in a glass-roofed shed. And when you come back, the photograph will be old, and your work will be new. Iris looked at the photograph for a long second more. She did not see her own face. She saw instead the shape of her own hand around the lapel of Augustus Wexley's jacket. It was the only part of her, in the entire frame, that did not look like the rest of her life. All right, she said. Tell her I'll come Tuesday. Mara exhaled. I told her you'd come tomorrow. Iris, you have 9 hours to pack. I'll drive you. Halcyon Mill was a stone and cedar property on the Hudson with a long lawn that the river fog took every morning and gave back by noon. The main house was Georgian and earnest. The carriage house, which Augustus had had retrofitted for his mother in the last year of her illness, was a low, pale stone building with one long, ramped entry, a kitchen the size of a small chapel, a bedroom whose door slid sideways, and a glass-roofed studio out the back that someone had clearly cleaned and reorganized in the night, because the work table was waxed and there was a kettle by the window that had not been there a year ago. Iris arrived on Monday at 4 in the afternoon. Rosa Delacroix met her at the carriage house door, with one hand on the frame, in the same uniform she had worn at the gala, and said, Miss Calloway, the kitchen has tea. The studio has light. Mr. Wexley will not call on you unless you ring. Rosa, thank you. I will be in the main house. The bell on the kitchen counter is to me. The bell on the studio is to me. The bell by the bed is to no one in particular, and you should ring it if you cannot sleep. You are very good. I am very ordinary. Come, the bedroom door has been adjusted. It slides at the touch of one finger. Try it. Iris tried it. The door slid at the touch of one finger. She looked at the kitchen, the lowered hooks, the cabinet pulls at chair height, the kettle whose handle had been replaced with one she could lift with her wrist, and she understood, with a slow heat at the back of her neck, that a man had spent some part of his last 24 hours redoing the carriage house for her. Rosa, she said, when did Mr. Wexley have this done? Mr. Wexley, Rosa said pleasantly, had the carriage house built like this in 2014. It was for his mother. He has not changed it since. The kettle is new. I told him the old one was an offense to the wrist of a serious tea drinker. I told him that this morning, Rosa agreed, and turned, and left, and the door slid shut behind her on its single-finger track, without making a sound. Iris stood in the middle of the kitchen for a long minute. Then she went to the window and watched the river fog lift off the lawn, and tried to decide whether the thing she felt was relief. It was not relief. It was something steadier and more inconvenient, and she could not yet name it. So she rolled out into the glass-roofed studio and switched on the heat, and the soft work light, and the small auxiliary lamp over the bench, and she got to work on the Saint-Hilaire restoration drawings she had brought in a leather folder, because the work was the only thing in the room that did not feel like a gift from someone she could not yet pay back. She worked until 8. She did not ring any of the bells. At 8:10, Rosa knocked once at the carriage house door and slid a tray inside without speaking and slid back out. The tray held lentil soup, bread, and a single dark glass bottle of mineral water. There was a card under the soup bowl that read, in a clean, unadorned hand, "Welcome. I will not call. A.W." Iris read the card twice. She set it face down on the table. She ate the soup. She slept. By Wednesday morning, a routine had built itself out of the carriage house's geometry. Iris woke at 6. The carriage house bedroom faced east, and the river light came in pale on the sliding door. She made her own tea in the new kettle. Rosa had been right about the wrist, and worked at the studio bench until 10. At 10, Rosa brought a small breakfast on the tray and left without lingering. At 12, lunch on the same tray. At 2, Iris took the stone path out to the lawn and along the lower edge of the orchard. At 4, she came back. At 7, dinner. At 9, lights out. Augustus Wexley did not appear. She had not known what she would do if he did appear, and the not knowing was the part of her week that took up the most floor space in her head. She had told herself, on the train, that she would treat him as a host. She had told herself, in the carriage house, that she would treat him as a stranger who had owed her a courtesy and paid it. Neither rehearsal got the chance. On Thursday afternoon, she rolled along the orchard path and turned the corner into the rose garden and stopped, because he was sitting on the stone bench at the far end of it, in a wool coat against the late April chill, reading. He looked up. He set the book down without marking the page. "Miss Calloway." "I should—" He started to stand, and then he did not stand, because she was watching him decide, and his old money instincts had collided with what she had told him in the ballroom about terms. He sat back down. He put his right palm flat on the stone beside him. "You did not ring," he said. "I did not." "I expected nothing less." He nodded. A small smile moved across his mouth, and did not stay there. "Would it be— I beg your pardon. May I ask you something? Is there anything in the carriage house that does not work?" "Then that is the answer." She had meant to roll past him. She did not. There was a small white iron table to the left of the stone bench, the kind of table set out in country gardens for tea trays no one ever used, and she set the break of her chair beside it, and looked at the roses, and was quiet for what she would, afterward, remember as a long time. "Mr. Wexley," she said, "I would like to ask you something in return. Did you build this carriage house for your mother?" She felt him go still beside her. She did not look. She watched a bee work the open face of a white rose, and she gave him the courtesy of not watching what his face did. "I did," he said after a moment. "It was finished," he said carefully. "The autumn after she was gone." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. She wanted it." He paused. "She wanted it for the year she did not have." The bee left the rose. The garden was quiet enough that Iris could hear the river. She did not turn her head. "Mr. Wexley," she said, "may I ask you one more thing?" "Of course." "Was carrying me on Saturday—" She stopped. She had not planned to say it. She had planned to say nothing at all, ever, about Saturday, and certainly not to him, and certainly not in his rose garden with a bee in the air. Was it because of her? He took a long breath. "In some part," he said. "The mechanics of it." His voice was very level. "I learned the mechanics of carrying someone when I was 14. I learned them on the porch swing at this house. I would not have known how to ask you to be carried at all, if I had not known the mechanics." "And the rest?" "The rest, Miss Calloway, was you." She did not look at him. She did not move her hand off the brake lever. She listened to the river for another long minute, and then she said, "Thank you for the honest answer." And she released the brake, and she rolled back along the stone path toward the carriage house, and she did not look back, and he did not call after her. That night, at the bench in the glass-roofed studio, she pulled the Saint-Hilaire drawings toward her and got 2 hours of work done, before she stopped pretending she was looking at them and went to bed. The thing the city did not know about Augustus Wexley, because the city had never been invited to know it, was that he had spent the first 9 months of 1998 learning the choreography of carrying a body that no longer carried itself. The ALS had come for his mother's legs first. By the spring of 1998, she could still raise her arms. By the autumn, she could not. He had been 14. His father had been a man whose career was elsewhere. The household had organized itself, with the calm seriousness with which old houses organize themselves around what cannot be helped. Around the small problem of moving Eleanor Wexley from the porch swing, where she liked the late light, to the bedroom where the night nurse could reach her in the dark. Pace, eye contact, the joke before the lift. He had built it. He had built it because there was no one else, and because she had asked him to learn it without making it look like she was asking, which was the particular grace of his mother, and the particular grief of his 14. He had not carried anyone since the November she was gone. He sat in the dark of his office at the main house on Thursday night, with his right palm flat on the desk, and tried to decide what to do with the fact that he had told Iris Cunaway the truth in the rose garden. He had not meant to tell her the truth. He had meant to tell her a softer version. The softer version had not been available. He suspected she had asked the question, knowing the softer version would not be available, and the suspicion was not unwelcome. He picked up the phone. He set it down. He picked it up again. "Mr. Wexley. She is at the bench. Will you tell her?" He stopped. "Will you tell her nothing? I will not call on her tomorrow. I will be in the city." "Rosa, was I—" He could not finish. Said Rosa Delacroix in the kitchen of Halcyon Mill, 400 yards away, and her voice had a particular kind of fondness in it that Augustus had not heard since he was a boy. "You were perfectly all right, Mr. Wexley. Sleep." He slept. He was in the city all day Friday on the Saint-Hilaire matter. The Preservation Board had a closed working session at the Municipal Building at 10, and a stakeholder forum at 3. The architect of record for the 1923 lobby, a man named Kessler, who had managed the restoration tender, sat on Augustus's right at both meetings and produced, on the back of a folded napkin at lunch, a small and unhelpful suggestion. "We need a designer," Kessler said. "The board wants to hear from a working designer about the original ironwork. They will not accept a project manager. They will not accept me. They want to hear it from a craftsperson who can read the 1923 drawings on site." "You have someone in mind?" "I have a short list of 3. The first is in Berlin and will not come for any amount. The second has a public relationship with our previous owner that the board will read as bias. The third is Iris Calloway." Augustus folded the napkin in half and folded it again and laid it on the table. "That is," he said. He did not finish the sentence. "Kessler, that is a very particular request." "She is at the country. It would not be possible for me to ask her. For reasons related to Saturday." Kessler considered this. Kessler was 61 and had restored buildings for the Wexley Group for 19 years, and had a particular weariness about him on the subject of the firm's social calendar. "Mr. Wexley," he said, "if you do not ask her, I will. I am happy to be the asker. I would prefer your blessing. The board hearing is in 8 days. We do not have any other working designer in the country who can read 1923 wrought iron drawings on site. She authored 2 of the foundational papers on the period. I have been waiting 12 years for an excuse to put her in front of a panel." "Then you ask her," Augustus said. "And you ask her without reference to me. Tell her the project. Tell her the fee. Tell her she would be appearing on her own credentials. She will know I am behind the email. Tell her anyway." "Go on." "I know." Augustus put his right palm flat on the table. "I am asking you to ask her," he said, "because if I ask her, she will say no for the wrong reason." Kessler nodded and folded his own napkin and asked for the bill. Mara called the carriage house on Saturday morning at 9:15 and said, without preamble, "Listen, the broker thing? It smells like old money perfume." Iris was at the studio bench with a magnifier and a 1923 elevation drawing under it and a piece of dark wax in her left hand. "What broker thing?" "The Saint-Hilaire tender. The official approach came in 20 minutes ago. Kessler, the architect of record. Polite, clean, your fee, your terms, the board hearing the Friday after next. He CC'd me as your representation. Which I appreciate, by the way, because most of your would-be employers think you are your own representation, which you absolutely are not, because you cannot read your own contracts after midnight." "Mara, I'm not getting to the point yet, am I?" "So?" "So I do not believe Kessler thought of you on his own. I think Kessler was steered." Iris set down the wax. "Mara," she said, "every restoration of a 1923 lobby in this city would steer toward me. There are 4 of us in the country who can read those drawings. 1 is in Berlin, 1 is in trouble, 1 is me. The 4th is the architect's nephew, who is incompetent." "You sound like you've been thinking about it." "I have been thinking about whether to take the work. I have not been thinking about who recommended me, because I do not need to be recommended for this particular brief. Mara, listen to me. There are 2 things in this country I will not let happen this year. 1 is the Saint-Hilaire lobby being botched by a man who cannot read 1923 wrought iron. The other is me looking at every honest professional invitation through the lens of a man's chest in a charcoal jacket. I will take the brief, and I will go to the hearing." A pause on the line. "All right," Mara said. "I'll send you the contract. I'll fly up Thursday for the prep." "Mara, I'm listening." Iris hung up and looked at the wax in her hand. It was warm at the edges where her fingers had pressed it. She set it down on the corner of the 1923 elevation. She turned the magnifier on it. She pulled the drawing closer. The wax on the paper looked like a hand-drawn line. The line, against the photostat of the 1923 ironwork, looked like a small, dark heart shape that had nothing to do with the ironwork at all. She picked up the wax, smoothed it out, and went back to work. But the heart shape stayed in her head. And so, for a moment, did the carriage house tea cabinet. She had alphabetized it the night before, alphabetized against Rosa's loose chronological system, which had been built around what Mr. Wexley reached for first in the morning, and which Iris had decided, at midnight, to rebel against on principle. Earl Grey was no longer next to mint. English breakfast was no longer next to chamomile. The whole cabinet now ran A to Z, and would, by morning, run hot. She thought, then, that this was the kind of small thing one did when one was not, strictly speaking, a guest. She let herself think it. She let herself not yet decide what it meant. She went back to the iron. At 6 o'clock the following morning, Augustus Wexley, who had come back to the country house at midnight and was making his own tea because he did not call on the staff before 7, opened the tea cabinet in the main house pantry and stopped. The cabinet had been rearranged. The cabinet had been rearranged with such confident neatness that for a half-second he wondered whether Rosa had retired in the night and been replaced by a librarian. The teas now ran from Assam to Yunnan in steady alphabetical order. His mint, which had lived for 11 years next to his Earl Grey, because that was what he reached for in autumn, had been relocated to the lower right with the rest of the herbals. His chamomile had been relocated to the lower left with the rest of the bedtime infusions. There was no longer a category called Mr. Wexley's morning shelf. There was, instead, a system. He stood for a long minute with one hand on the cabinet door. Then he laughed once, very quietly, into the dim morning kitchen, which was the first thing of its kind that had come out of him since November of 1998. And he made a cup of mint anyway, and went out across the lawn to the carriage house studio with it. He did not knock. He set the cup on the threshold of the studio's outer step, and went away before she could see him. At 8, when Iris rolled out to the step to start her day with the river light, she found a cooling cup of mint tea and a small, folded card under it. "Madam, You have made a serious error of judgment. The mint belongs next to the Earl Grey. There is a reason. A.W. She read it twice. She did not look around for him because she suspected he had calculated his exit before she could. Her thumb pressed against the brake lever once, harder than she expected, and she let out a soft, surprised sound that was, to her own ear, perilously close to a laugh. She wrote a card and left it on the kitchen counter for Rosa to deliver. Sir, there is no defensible reason. The system is now indexed. I will hear arguments at 4. I see. At 4, she did not hear arguments because he did not come. At 5, he sent Rosa back to the carriage house with a single sentence. Defense withdrawn. The court awaits the verdict on chamomile. A.W. She did not write back. She kept the card. She put it inside the leather folder with the Saint-Hilaire drawings because, she told herself, that was the only flat surface she had on hand. And she did not at that point ask herself why she had not, for example, put it in the recycling. The gossip column landed on the following Wednesday. It was longer than the first piece. It had been pitched at a slower-burning kind of damage, the kind written by a person who had not been at the gala, but had spent the week since calling people who had been. It used the words performance, image rehabilitation, and the optics of dignity. It quoted an unnamed source close to the family who said, I would not call it a publicity stunt exactly, but Augustus is in the middle of a $120 million acquisition. He needs the city to forgive him for being his father's son. A man does not carry a stranger across a ballroom at the height of a deal cycle without a reason. I have known Augustus a long time. He does not do anything without a reason. The piece ended with a long paragraph about Iris's commercial trajectory, 3 commissions before the gala, 14 inquiries since, and an unattributed photograph of the front of her Brooklyn studio with a press van parked at the curb. Iris read it in the carriage house kitchen with a piece of toast in one hand and her own jaw very level. Mara read it on the train up from Penn Station and called her at 11. I know. They are saying you took the work because he carried you. They are saying it on a Wednesday, so it leads the Sunday cycle. They have a photograph of your shop. There is a van in front of it. The van is not mine. Iris. Mara, I have known the piece was coming since Friday. I will not let it unset me. I have a board hearing in 9 days, and I will spend the next 9 days on iron. All right, I'm 40 minutes out. Will you make a list of the questions the board will ask? I will run drill with you tonight. Yes? All right, Iris corrected herself, because she had already heard the word once that morning, and her ear was beginning to flag the repetition. I will make the list. Mara hung up. Iris sat in the kitchen for a long minute and looked at the photograph of her shop. It was a photograph of an awning she had painted in May of last year. The awning was a soft chalk green, the color she had chosen because Lila, when they were both girls, had owned a pencil case in that exact shade. The press van in front of the awning did not know that, and the photographer did not know that, and the column did not know that, and Iris had, in her own private architecture, kept the color of the awning as a small private offering to a girl who had owned a pencil case in 1996. And she did not, now, like the press van in front of it. She put the paper down. She rolled out to the studio. She got back to work on the iron. Delphine Marchetti Wexley arrived at Halcyon Mill on Wednesday evening unannounced. She arrived in a sedan with a driver. She arrived at 7:30, which was the hour the carriage house kitchen smelled most strongly of Rosa's soup. She did not knock at the main house. She came directly across the lawn to the carriage house door and rapped twice on the slid sideways glass. Iris had been at the kitchen table with a tray of soup and the day's column of the Times obituaries, which she read every day because, she had once told Mara, somebody should know who is leaving the city. She set the obituaries down. She slid the door open. Mrs. Wexley. Delphine came into the kitchen in a charcoal traveling coat that she did not remove. She did not sit. She stood with one hand on the back of the chair Iris would have offered her, and looked, without expression, at the new alphabetized tea cabinet across the room. You have rearranged my pantry, she said. That was the main house pantry. Forgive me. One notes, Delphine said, "that the rearrangement is competent. One also notes that you have, in 9 days, become a problem of mine, Miss Calloway." "That is what I gathered." "I will be brief. I have arranged for a clarifying statement to be released on Friday morning. The statement will indicate that the dance at the gala was a courtesy extended to a commissioned artist whose work that night was the auction's centerpiece. The statement will indicate that Miss Calloway was a guest of the Wexley patron house, and not, as has been suggested, a private guest of any member of the family. The statement will not name you in its first sentence. It will not be sent without your sign-off on the language. I have brought you a draft." She set a single folded page on the kitchen table. She did not take her hand off the back of the chair. "Mrs. Wexley," Iris said, "did you write this yourself? Did Mr. Wexley read it? You have come here without telling him. Why?" "Because, Miss Calloway, my stepson is a person who, when asked to choose between his deal and his dignity, will choose his dignity, and he will lose both. He will not lose both if I draft the statement. He will not lose the deal at all if you sign the statement. His or yours?" Delphine considered her for a long moment. Her hand went to the back of her left earring and stayed there. "Miss Calloway," she said, "you have, I gather, been told that I do not like you." "You have gathered it?" "I do not dislike you. I dislike a photograph of you in my son's arms in a room with 212 telephones. I dislike a column on a Wednesday that lands a Sunday lead. I dislike that I have spent 11 years protecting the public face of a name that has been spoken in this country for 141 years, from the kind of footnote that makes that name funny at parties. The dignity I am protecting, Miss Calloway, is the dignity of a name. It is also, incidentally, the dignity of yours." "I understand." "I will read the draft." "I will not sign it tonight." Delphine inclined her head. She did not argue. "When I have read it twice." "Mrs. Wexley, why did you bring it yourself?" Delphine looked, for the first time since she had come into the room, like a woman who did not have an answer prepared. The look passed in a heartbeat. She replaced it with the look she had brought into the room, which was the look of a woman who had spent her professional life replacing one expression with another in the time it took most people to blink. "Because I would not trust anyone else with the language," she said. "Good night, Miss Calloway." She slid the door open. She slid it closed behind her. She did not look back. Iris sat in the kitchen for a long minute, and then she picked up the folded page, and she read the draft, and the language was clean and accurate, and slightly merciful in 2 specific places, where Iris's own draft would not have been merciful at all. She set the page down and did not sign it. She finished her soup. She did not sleep until 2. The Preservation Board hearing was held on the second Friday of Iris's stay at the country, in a panelled chamber on the 7th floor of the municipal building. The chamber had been built in 1908, and the radiators had been adjusted exactly once since. There were 7 board members behind a long mahogany table, an architect named Kessler at the witness bench, and a public gallery of 41 seats, almost all of which were occupied by people whose interest in 1923 ironwork was, Iris suspected on entering, secondary to their interest in her chair. She had dressed in a way that did not invite the secondary interest. A clean, dark wool dress, a small silver collar she had made herself, hair pulled back at the nape. She had brought a leather case of drawings, a magnifier on a chain, and a small velvet roll of original 1923 hinge samples she had spent 4 nights cataloguing. She did not look at Augustus Wexley when she came in. He was in the 3rd row of the public gallery, in a charcoal coat that was not the gala suit. He did not look at her either. She felt the back of her neck cool, and made a private decision, between the threshold and the witness bench, to spend the next 2 hours pretending he was not in the building. The board chair was a woman in her 70s named Pell. She was an architectural historian. She had been chair for 19 years. She read out the matter to be heard. The proposed conveyance of the St. Hilaire Hotel from the St. Hilaire Family Trust to the Wexley Hospitality Group, with covenants for the preservation of the 1923 lobby in particular. and she invited the working designer to address the board on the question of authenticity. Iris rolled to the witness bench. There was a step at the foot of the bench. The clerk had been informed in advance. He had laid a ramped platform that brought her up to the height of the long table. She thanked him. "Miss Calloway," Pell said, "please proceed." Iris had rehearsed nothing. Mara had asked her to. Iris had refused. "I will not rehearse," she had said in the kitchen at midnight, "because I will know the answers, and rehearsal would be a kind of apologizing in advance." She unrolled the velvet bundle on the table in front of her. She set the magnifier beside it. She set the leather folder on her lap. She breathed in once, evenly. She talked for 40 minutes. She talked about the 1923 hinges first, because the hinges were the foundation of the lobby's identity. 3 hand-forged designs, 2 of them by the workshop of a man whose name was on the building's original ledger and whose grand-nephew Iris had interviewed in 1989. She talked about the wrought ribbon trim along the elevator's upper architrave, which was, in the proposed restoration, the single most likely thing to be lost to a contractor who could not read the difference between the 1923 hand-hammer pattern and a 1948 die-press knockoff. She held up 2 pieces of hinge, one original, one die-press, and walked the board through the marks of authenticity by eye. The slight asymmetry of the hand hammer, the cooling crack that ran along one face, the maker's stamp set inside the hinge cup and not on the outside, the way the hand hammer caught light differently along the curve. She talked about the chemistry of the original blackening agent, which was not the same blackening agent used on East Coast wrought iron after about 1931, and which therefore had to be reformulated for any in-kind repair. She named 2 living restoration smiths in upstate New York who could reformulate it. She named the percentages by weight. 2 of the board members took notes. 1 did not. The architect Kessler watched her with an expression that did not move at all. She did not look at the public gallery. She did not look at Augustus. She talked about the marble inlay in the lobby's foundation seal, the design that included the hotel's 1923 monogram and the architect's mark, partly defaced by a renovation in 1971, and she proposed, on the spot, a recovery method that involved scanning the surviving fragments at 3 different wavelengths and cross-referencing them against an archive of the architect's working drawings she happened to know were held in a private library in Massachusetts that would, with the right covering letter, lend them out. "You happen to know," Pell repeated. "I have a reading card," Iris said. "I have used it twice. The librarian is good." A small ripple moved through the board members. Pell's mouth lifted at one corner, the smallest concession of pleasure Iris had ever seen on a panel chair, and she said, "Miss Calloway, may I ask you whether you have any conflict of interest to declare?" The chamber went very quiet. The radiator clicked. Iris pressed her thumb against the brake lever of her chair under the table. "Chair Pell," she said, "I've been the commissioned designer of the Spring Foundation Gala keynote auction piece, at the request of the Wexley Patron House, and the night before the photographs that have circulated about Mr. Wexley and myself. I have been a guest of the Wexley country estate for the past 11 days, while the city press has been outside my Brooklyn studio. I have accepted this Saint-Hilaire restoration brief at the request of Mr. Kessler, the architect of record. I have not discussed this restoration brief with any member of the Wexley family, including Mr. Wexley himself, since the brief was offered to me. I have not been promised any consideration by the Wexley Group beyond the fee that has been disclosed to this board in the brief letter. I will also tell you, Chair Pell, that if you decide on the basis of the photographs that I cannot be a credible witness on the authenticity of 1923 ironwork, you will be the first panel chair in this country to do so, and you will be doing 1923 ironwork a disservice. The hinges do not know about the photographs." A laugh, a single startled laugh, went through the board members. Pell did not laugh. She inclined her head a quarter inch, which was, Iris guessed, Pell's version of a laugh. "Thank you, Miss Calloway," Pell said. "The hinges do not know about the photographs. I will use the line. Members of the board, are there questions for the witness?" There were. There were questions for 56 more minutes. Iris answered every one of them without consulting the folder on her lap. The architect Kessler did not speak. He did not need to. Augustus did not move from his seat in the third row. At the end of the questions, Pell did something unusual. She suspended the hearing for a 5-minute break, and during the break, she came down to the witness bench in person, without her staff, without her papers. And she placed one hand very lightly on the corner of Iris's table, and she said, in a voice low enough that only Iris could hear it, "Miss Cannaway, I have been chair of this board for 19 years. I have heard 411 witnesses. You are the third best I have ever heard. Whatever else happens in the Wexley matter, I want you to know that. You may use the line if you wish. I will repeat it under oath." Iris did not trust herself to speak. She inclined her head a 1/4 inch, the way Pell had, and the chair nodded back, and the break ended, and the board voted unanimously to bless the conveyance with covenants attached, and the Saint-Hilaire deal was, by 3:30 on a Friday afternoon, structurally safe. Iris rolled out of the chamber, down the marble corridor, into the elevator. She did not look at the third row. The third row had emptied during the break and had not refilled. She rolled out onto the wet April pavement, and Mara was waiting at the curb with the town car door open, and Mara did not say a single word, which was, in 12 years of friendship, the highest form of praise Mara had to offer. At Halcyon Mill that evening, the rose garden was empty, and the wind off the river was clean. Iris had not eaten lunch. Rosa had set a tray for her in the carriage house kitchen, and had not waited for her to thank her. The tray held a clean roast chicken sandwich, a pot of mint tea, and a small note in the same unadorned hand as the one a week earlier. "Madam, well done. A.W." She held the card for a long moment. She did not put it in the recycling. She put it next to the first one, inside the leather folder with the Saint-Hilaire drawings, which was beginning, she noticed, to be the warmest object she owned. A knock at the carriage house door. One knock. She slid the door open. Augustus Wexley was on the step. He had a folder in one hand and a small carved wooden bird in the other. The bird was about the size of a thumb. It was old, and the paint on it had worn to the wood at the head. "Mr. Wexley, I will not stay. May I?" He started again. "Would it be acceptable to leave this with you?" He set the folder on the kitchen counter and the bird on top of it. "The folder is the architect's working notes from the Massachusetts Library," he said. "Kessler called the librarian. She sent them by courier this morning before the hearing. I held them until after the hearing because I did not want them to look like a hint. The bird is—" He stopped. "The bird is not for any particular reason." "Mr. Wexley, I will go. I will not call on you tomorrow. He took a breath. "Madam, would it be acceptable if I returned the day after?" She looked at the bird. She picked it up. The paint was almost gone at the head, but a careful eye could see that it had once been the color of a chalk green pencil case. "Mr. Wexley," she said, "I will be in the studio tomorrow until 4. I will be in the kitchen at 5. You may call on me at 5. He looked at her for a long second. He put his right palm flat on the doorframe. "Of course," he said. 5. He left. She slid the door closed. She set the bird on the windowsill above the sink, where the morning river light would hit it first. She did not, then, allow herself to ask why the bird had been carved at all, or by whom, or for which year. She went to bed early. She slept all the way through for the first time since the gala. Saturday morning was the first day of true spring. The river fog lifted off Halcyon Mill's lawn at 9:20. The wisteria along the main house's west elevation had begun to come in 2 days early. Rosa was at the kitchen of the main house, cooking down rhubarb for the year's first compote, and Augustus, who had not slept more than 3 hours, was in the rose garden in shirt sleeves, with a small carving blade in his hand and another piece of basswood on the stone bench beside him. Iris rolled along the orchard path at 11 and turned the corner into the rose garden, and saw him before he saw her. She did not announce herself. She watched the way his shoulders held when he was working with his hands, the looseness she had not seen in his shoulders in any of the previous 11 days. And she watched the bird emerge under the blade, the way a face emerges from a window. He looked up. He set the blade down without finishing the cut. He did not stand. "Mr. Wexley?" "I am." She set the brake of her chair beside the bench. He did not move the basswood to make room for her. He moved it because the wind had shifted, and the chips would otherwise have gone into the lap of her dress, which was a thing he did almost before he was conscious of doing it, and the smallness of it landed harder in her than it should have. "You carve." "From whom?" She did not answer at once. She watched the bird in his hand. The head was just beginning. The body was almost done. "What was her name?" The word came out of him quietly enough that the wind almost took it. He set the blade down. He put his right palm flat on the stone bench. He looked, for the first time since Iris had known him, like a man who had not finished growing. "Mr. Wexley." "Augustus, then." "Iris." The new use of names sat between them for a moment, without doing anything in particular. The wind moved through the wisteria. A bee landed on a white rose. The kitchen's screen door, 50 yards across the lawn, opened and closed once. He did not pick the blade back up. "There is a piece you may want to hear," he said, "about the carriage house. My mother spent the last spring in the carriage house. I built it for her in February of that year, because the main house had a staircase she could no longer use, and she was tired of being moved through the kitchen at the back. The architect understood quickly. The builders understood quickly. We finished the kitchen and the bedroom and the sliding door in 8 weeks. The studio out back was hers. She had been a painter. She did not paint that spring. She sat in the studio in the light and read. She told me once that the carriage house had given her a country house of her own at the end, and that she had not known until that spring how badly she had wanted one." He paused. "She was lost to us in November of that year. I have not finished the studio for any other purpose. I have not slept in the carriage house. I have not let anyone sleep in it. I let you sleep in it, because the city was outside your shop window, and because He stopped. "I have run out of the sentence. Forgive me." Iris let his name settle in the rose garden air without doing anything to it. She thought about the row of small, clean handprints that would have been left on his sleeves by a woman whose grip had failed her in stages. She thought about the way certain houses learn to carry their own grief in the joints between rooms, so that the people who live in them never have to do all of the carrying themselves. She thought about a 14-year-old who had taught himself a pace and a count by lifting a body that did not lift back. She did not ask the question she had been preparing on the path. She asked the one underneath it. Was she the reason for the dance? He was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the bird in his hand. He set it on the stone beside the blade. "She loved a waltz," he said. "She danced until the spring of 1998. After that, I carried her down to the porch and back. I did not learn the steps because there was no one to dance with after her. I have not asked anyone to dance in 22 years, Iris. Until I asked you. I know it is a difficult thing to be told." "It is not." She stopped. She pressed her thumb against the brake lever. "It is not a difficult thing to be told. It is a thing I've wanted to be told by someone, by somebody, for a long time." She felt the heat of his attention without looking at it. She watched the bee on the white rose. She watched the wind in the wisteria. She listened to her own heart beat once, and again, and a third time, in the steady, reasonable rhythm of a woman who had built a life around not asking for things. "Iris, I would like to spend tomorrow with you in the studio. I will not work. I will read on the bench in the corner. I will leave when you tell me to leave. May I?" He picked the blade back up. He did not finish the bird. He set both the blade and the bird on the stone bench beside him, and put his right palm flat over both of them. He looked at her with a steadiness that did not ask anything else of her, and the steadiness was the first thing in her life since the accident that had felt entirely like permission. She rolled back along the stone path toward the carriage house at noon, and she ate Rosa's bread, and she worked at the bench until 5, and she felt, for for the first time since the November the chair had become the chair, that she had a thing she did not have to perform. He came to the studio on Sunday at 10. He brought a thermos of black coffee and a paperback of poems, and his right hand was the same right hand it had been the day before. He sat on the corner bench. He read. He did not speak for the first hour and 40 minutes. He looked up once at 12, when Iris set down her loop and rolled her shoulders, and he said, very quietly, "Mint tea." And she said, "Yes." And he made it in the carriage house kitchen, and brought her the cup and set it on the corner of the bench beside her left hand, and went back to the corner. She worked. He read. The river fog came in at 1 and lifted by 2, and the studio glass held the light the way the studio glass had been built to hold the light by an architect who had once been instructed by a woman whose son was, at 22 minutes past 2 on a Sunday in April, sitting in the corner of his mother's studio with a paperback of poems and a girl who had not been carried in 8 years, 3 feet from him. She worked until 5. He read until 5. At 5, she set down her tools and she said, "I am hungry." And he said, "Come up to the kitchen of the main house. Rosa has the rhubarb." "I have not eaten in the main house since I came here." "You have not invited me until now." "Why now?" "Because, Iris." He paused. He put his right palm flat on the spine of the paperback. "Because the rhubarb is the first of the year, and I have eaten the first of the year in that kitchen every year since I was 4, and I would like you to be there for it." She looked at the bird on the windowsill above the sink. She looked at the man on the corner bench. She did not say, "The fact is," and she did not say, "I cannot," and she did not say any of the 4 soft, dignified refusals she had built in her studio over the course of 8 years. Because there was nothing in the room, that day, to refuse. "All right," she said. The 4 soft refusals she had built between November of 1998 and that particular Sunday were not, she understood as she said the words, gone. They were where she had put them, folded in the same drawer of her studio with the loop she did not use, and the lens cloth she had bought for the loop she did not use. They were still there, still serviceable, still the right tool for the right approach, by the wrong man. They had simply not been called for in this room, and she had spent 8 years getting good at producing them on the instant, and was, for the first time in those 8 years, allowed to leave them in the drawer. The permission was not the man's. The permission was the rhubarb at the head of the table, and the candle Rosa would light on the way out, and the joke Augustus had not turned his head to watch land, and the small chalk-green head of the carved wooden bird 4 feet above the sink. Permission, she understood, was a thing a house gave you when the house had been waiting a long time and had decided it was you. He stood. He did not offer her his hand. He waited at the door until she was through it. He walked beside her, at her pace, along the stone path that ran from the carriage house to the kitchen door of the main house. He did not, then or later, walk in front of her. The kitchen had a long table of pale oak. Rosa had laid 4 places. The 4th, Iris realized, was for the rhubarb itself. A small white china dish at the head of the table, as though the rhubarb were the elder of the family. Iris would, later, think this was the moment she understood she had been let into the inside of something that had been closed for 22 years. They ate the rhubarb. Rosa made one wry observation about the wisteria coming early. Augustus made one joke about the architect's drawing on the wall of the dining room, a small dry joke about a line that had been drawn with what looked like a fishhook. And Iris laughed once, very quietly, and Augustus did not turn his head, because turning his head, he had learned at 14, was the surest way to make someone stop laughing. After dinner, Rosa took the dishes. Iris and Augustus sat in the kitchen with 2 cups of mint tea and a single candle that Rosa had lit on the way out. The wisteria moved against the window. The river fog had come back in. "I have not asked you whether you would consider—" He stopped. "I have not asked you whether you would consider letting me into a part of your life that is not this country house." "Augustus, I am not asking yet. I am telling you that I will ask. I would like you to know that I will, so that, when I do, the question is not a surprise." She set the cup down. She put her hand flat on the table beside it. "Augustus, you may ask me on a Friday in May," she said, "and I will tell you what I am able to tell you on that Friday." "It is more than I expected to offer." She turned the cup a quarter arc on its saucer. She watched the mint leaf at the bottom of the cup drift toward the rim and stop. She thought then about how a man composed himself for an event he intended to ask for, and about how the composing was not the asking, and about how the difference between the two, between rehearsal and act, had been the entire margin by which her own 8 years had been organized. She had rehearsed the 4 refusals. She had not rehearsed the 1 acceptance. She watched the candle on the table, and watched the wisteria move at the window, and felt the small calm of a woman who has been told the size of the question before being asked it. The candle moved in the small draught from the screen. The wisteria moved in the larger wind from the river. They did not speak again for a long time. They drank their tea. He walked her back along the stone path to the carriage house. He did not kiss her. He had not, in any of the 11 days, attempted to kiss her, and she had noticed, and had understood, and had not, until that night, decided what she felt about it. That night, on the stone path, she decided that what she felt was something she was, for the first time in 8 years, willing to wait for. He slid the carriage house door open. He stepped back. He said, "Good night, Iris." She said, "Good night, Augustus." She slept. She did not dream. She woke at 6:12 in the morning, and the light on the windowsill caught the chalk green head of the carved wooden bird before it caught anything else in the room. Delphine Marchetti Wexley arrived at Halcyon Mill the following Tuesday at 4:30 in the afternoon. She had not been expected. She had not sent a message. She came in a different sedan, with no driver, which was unusual enough that Rosa noticed it through the kitchen window and did not, on principle, go outside to greet her. Iris had spent the afternoon in the rose garden with a sketchpad. The rhubarb compote of Sunday had given her an idea for a small piece, a hammered silver oval the size of a thumbnail, set with a single pink tourmaline, and she had been drawing it from 3 angles in the soft pencil she kept for the days when the work was a pleasure rather than a commission. She did not know how long Delphine had been in the main house. She turned the corner of the orchard path on her way back toward the carriage house at 5:20, and the library window at the east elevation was 3/4 open, and the curtain inside the library moved. Iris should not have looked. The library was not part of any path she had any reason to take. The library was the room in the main house Augustus had told her was Rosa's domain, into which the family did not, by long custom, intrude. The window, however, faced the orchard path. The curtain moved. Iris looked. Delphine was alone in the library. She was sitting in one of the 2 leather armchairs by the cold fireplace. She had not removed her coat. She had her phone held to her ear, very steady, and her eyes were closed, and her free hand was on the arm of the chair with the fingers slightly splayed, the way a person's hand goes when they are listening to a voice they have not heard in a long time. She was crying. She was crying in the way a person cries when they have decided not to cry. The breath very still, the chin perfectly level, the tears moving down both cheeks without resistance, the throat not making a sound. The phone played, faintly, a young man's voice. Iris could not hear what the young man was saying. She could see that whatever it was, it had been said a long time ago, and Delphine was hearing it now for what was very clearly not the first time. Iris did not move. She did not roll the chair forward. She did not roll the chair back. She let the wheels settle into the soft gravel of the orchard path, until the sound of them, if there had been any, had stopped. She watched Delphine for the length of 2 breaths. Delphine did not see her. Delphine's eyes did not open. The voicemail finished. Delphine lowered the phone. She set it screen down on the arm of the chair. She placed both hands palm down on her knees. She breathed in once, audibly, and out once, audibly. And then she touched the back of her left earring with the same automatic gesture she had used in the gala ballroom and at the kitchen door of the carriage house. And her face composed itself, in approximately 3 seconds, into the face she wore in public.
Iris rolled back along the orchard path, one wheel's width at a time, until she was around the corner of the wisteria. She did not look back. She did not speak of what she had seen to Augustus that evening when he called on her at 5. She did not speak of it to Mara when Mara called from the city at 9. She did not speak of it to Rosa, who would, she suspected, have known anyway.
She slept that night, with the curtains half drawn, and the carved wooden bird on the windowsill caught a different light at 6 the next morning, because the wind had turned the trees outside. And she thought, before her tea, that the wind in the trees and the woman in the library had been, somehow, the same lesson. It rained on Thursday. The river fog did not lift at noon. The rose garden was empty by 2:30. Augustus had gone into the city for the closing meeting on the Saint-Hilaire. The board's covenants had been ratified the previous Monday, and the main house had a stillness to it that the staff worked through without comment. Iris was at the carriage house bench, finalizing the pink tourmaline drawing, when the carriage house door slid open without a knock. Delphine stood on the threshold, with the reins still on the shoulders of her coat. She did not come in. She did not slide the door closed behind her. "Miss Calloway." "I will not stay. May I?" Delphine came 2 steps into the carriage house kitchen. She did not remove her coat. She stood with one hand on the back of the chair and looked, for the first time since she had walked into the room a week before, like a woman whose strategy had not yet been chosen for the conversation she was about to have. "Miss Calloway," she said, "you have, by all reports, conducted yourself well. Thank you. The Saint-Hilaire is, by yesterday's vote, ours. The covenants are workable. The board chair has called you, in private, the best witness she has heard in 19 years. I have heard this from 3 people. I have not heard it from her. I am not, generally, the person to whom she would say such a thing first. I have come, Miss Calloway, to ask you to leave." The rain on the windows turned the room briefly gray. Iris set her pencil down. "Mrs. Wexley, I am not threatening you. I am not offering you anything. I am asking you to leave on the terms of someone who is asking it. I will not telephone you in Brooklyn. I will not send a representative. I will not, if it is the next concern, contact the Saint-Hilaire team about your continued work on the lobby. You will be paid in full and on time." Delphine breathed in. Her hand went to the back of her left earring. The earring was a small pearl that day, plainer than the gala's diamond. Her fingers rested on it for a long second. She said then the sentence she had clearly come down from the city to deliver. She said that Iris had made her stepson hopeful, and that hopeful was a thing he had not been in 11 years, and that she had, in those 11 years, made herself competent at managing a great many of his moods, and was not competent at the one she saw in him now. She said she did not know how to manage it. She did not know how to protect it. She was, she said, afraid of it. "Mrs. Wexley." "Miss Calloway." The silence in the carriage house kitchen was the silence of a room that had been waiting a long time for a sentence. The rain did not move. Delphine's hand stayed on the back of the chair. She did not look away. "That is," she said. She did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. She breathed in once. She breathed out once. The composure she had brought into the room reorganized itself by a fraction, and Iris saw, for the briefest moment, the shape of the woman in the library armchair with the phone screened down on her knee. "Mrs. Wexley," Iris said, "I will tell you something I have not told him. I will tell you because you are afraid of the wrong thing, and the wrong fear, in my experience, is the most dangerous fear a family can carry. Are you listening?" "I am." Iris told her she was not staying because the sun was hopeful. She was staying, she said, because for the first time in 8 years, a person had not asked her to perform her own dignity for him. The sun had not done one thing in 11 days that compromised either of their names. He had carved a wooden bird. He had read a book of poems on a bench. He had not asked her to be brave at him. If Delphine wished her to leave on those terms, she would leave on those terms. She would leave tomorrow, she said, if Delphine could give her a true reason. The reason Delphine had brought to the kitchen that afternoon was not a true reason. She would not leave for it. Delphine looked at her for a very long second. "I will think about what you have said," she said. "I will go." She slid the door closed behind her. She did not speak to Rosa on the way out of the main house. She did not, that evening or the next morning, send any message to the carriage house. She got into the sedan at 5 and drove herself back to the city in the rain. And Iris sat at the bench in the studio, with the unfinished pink tourmaline drawing under her left hand, and did not, until 10 that night, allow herself to consider what she had said out loud. When she did, she put her right hand on the leather folder that held the Saint-Hilaire drawings and the 2 unadorned notes and the architect's working notes from Massachusetts, and she said, to the rain on the studio glass, very quietly, "I am in trouble." The rain did not disagree. He came home Friday at 6. The car came up the drive with its lights on against the rain. He did not stop at the main house. He came across the lawn in his coat to the carriage house door and slid it open without knocking, and stood on the threshold with the rain coming off him in long lines. "Augustus." "My stepmother. She told you to leave." "She did so without consulting me." Augustus did not, in the doorway, look like a man who had been told that his stepmother had preempted him. He looked like a man who had spent the 11 years since his father's funeral building a single private hypothesis about who in his household had been moving which letters into other hands, and had not, until that morning's phone call from Rosa, considered that the hypothesis had been wrong in the smallest place it could have been wrong. At the place of his own loyalty to a woman who had once read him The Wind in the Willows on the porch swing in the summer of 1995. Iris watched him notice the wrongness. She watched him decide not to make her watch him notice it. He took the noticing somewhere inside himself, the way he had once taken the lifting of a body that did not lift back, with the steady, reasonable rhythm of a man who had built a life around carrying what could not be carried by anyone else in the room. He stopped. He put his right palm flat on the doorframe. "I have spent 2 hours in the city composing the apology I owe you. I had 4 sentences. I have just lost 3 of them. May I come in?" "Of course." He came in. He closed the door. He took off the coat. He sat at the kitchen table without invitation, which was the first time he had done so without invitation, and Iris understood, watching him do it, that they had passed a line they would not need to pass again. "Augustus." "Tell me what she said. Tell me what you said. If you do not want to tell me what you said, tell me only what you want me to know." He closed his eyes for a long second. "I have not," he said. "I told her that for the first time in 8 years, a person has not asked me to perform my own dignity for him. I told her this was the reason I was staying. I told her that the reason she gave me to leave was not a true reason." "Did she?" He let out a breath. He opened his eyes. He looked at the bird on the windowsill above the sink, and then he looked at the leather folder on the kitchen counter, and then he looked at her, and the look was the look of a man who had stopped composing. "Iris," he said, "on a Friday in May, will you let me, Augustus? You may ask me now." He looked at her. He put his right palm flat on the kitchen table. He looked, oddly, like a man asking for himself. "Will you let me know you?" he said. The answer, when she gave it, did not have the architecture she had spent 8 years putting into her answers. It had no preamble. It had no apology. It had no small, clean fence of conditions placed in front of it, the way a careful woman places a small, clean tray in front of her chair when a stranger is about to put down a cup. It had only the 2 words. She watched them land in the kitchen. She watched him not catch them quickly. She watched him let them land, the way a man who has learned to lift bodies that do not lift back learns to let small things settle by themselves before he reaches for them. The kitchen, after the 2 words, held a different air than it had held a second earlier. She did not know yet what the air was made of. She knew only that the air was, for the first time in 8 years, not waiting for her to be brave at it. "That is That is more than I expected. It is more than I expected to offer. All right. The rain held against the studio glass for a long minute. The candle Rosa had lit 4 nights ago was still on the table. The wax had hardened, and the wick was clean. He took a match from the drawer and lit it. The kitchen filled with the small gold light of one candle at the start of a sentence. They sat across from each other for a long time. They did not speak. They did not need to. He left at 9:30. He did not kiss her then either. He walked back across the lawn in his coat in the rain, and Iris slid the carriage house door closed and sat at the table with the candle and the warm folder and the carved bird on the sill, and did not, for 2 hours, ask herself any question she did not want the answer to. Mara called on Saturday morning at 6:12. Iris was already awake. The river light was on the carved bird. She had not slept past 5 in 2 days. Listen, Mara said. Mara told her, then, that she had been chasing the broker thing since the column had landed, quietly, against her own better judgment, against Iris's instruction to let it lie. She told her that what she had found was not nothing, and that she would not let Iris find it from a reporter, or from him. She told her about the broker, a man named Hammond, who worked out of a quiet midtown office handling, for several old money houses, the kind of art purchases the houses did not want traced back to them in the first instance. Hammond was clean, she said. The brief itself was clean. The choice of designer was not. The Wexley patron house had ratified the choice. The original recommendation had come from a single private client through Hammond, who had been paid a sourcing fee of $14,000 to put Iris's name to the patron house on condition that the client's name not be disclosed. Hammond had not told Mara the client's name. Hammond had told her only that the client's office was on the 22nd floor of the Wexley Hotel. Iris did not say anything for a long second. There is only one office on the 22nd floor of the Wexley Hotel, she said. I know. I know. He recommended you anonymously. The repetition that came down the line then was not the repetition of an argument. It was the repetition Iris had learned, in 8 years of fielding the same wrong sentences from a great many people, to use when she needed the shape of a fact to harden in the room before she could touch it. She did it now, into the kitchen of a country carriage house she had been told, 3 days earlier, had been built by a 14-year-old for his failing mother. She did it with her hand flat on the table, beside the pot of tea Rosa had put down at 5:55. She did it with the morning light beginning to come through the river fog, onto the leather folder on the counter, and onto the small, chalk-green head of the bird on the windowsill above the sink. She did it the way a goldsmith tests a hinge before she commits to a setting. The shape did not bend. Before the gala. Before he had ever met me. Before he had ever met you. Iris, listen. I'm not telling you this to break it. I'm telling you this because if you find out from a column on a Wednesday, it will break. And if you find out from me on a Saturday at 6 in the morning, it is something you can decide what to do with. I do not know yet what to make of it. I'm telling you what I know. I will be at the train station at 11. Mara hung up. Iris sat at the kitchen table for a long time. She did not move. She did not roll out to the studio. She did not light the candle. She did not look at the bird on the sill. The river fog came in at 7 and lifted at 8, and the morning light hit the leather folder on the counter, the folder that held the Saint-Hilaire drawings and the architect's working notes, and the 2 unadorned notes signed A.W. And she sat with her hands flat on the table and did not move. She thought, then, the worst sentence she had thought in 8 years. She thought, maybe he was looking for someone to carry across a ballroom in February, and Hammond gave him a list, and I was on the list because I am a designer who would look right in the photograph, and a chair would look right in the photograph, and the row of inheritance would look right in the photograph, and the carry was the photograph he needed, and the carriage house was where the photograph could be developed in quiet, and every minute of the 11 days has been the slow development of an image he ordered in February. She thought, maybe Augustus Wexley really did all of this for the deal. She thought, maybe Augustus Wexley really did all of this for the photograph. She thought, maybe the carve and the bird and the rhubarb, and the candle, and the rain in his coat, and the apology he composed in the city. Maybe all of it has been the long, quiet practice of a man who has been trained, since he was 14, to carry someone he does not love with the choreography of a man who does. She thought, maybe I've been the longest commission of his year. The sentences were not true. She knew that. She also knew that she could not yet make the knowledge of their untruth louder than the sound of them. The accident had taught her, 8 years ago, that the brain, presented with 2 interpretations of a body in motion, would always, for the first minute, prefer the one that protected the heart. The minute, in her experience, lasted weeks. She rolled out to the studio. She put the loop down on the bench. She picked up the carved bird from the sill and put it inside the leather folder, and put the folder inside her travel case. She rolled to the bedroom. She slid the wardrobe open. She packed in 15 minutes. She did not write a note. At 10, she rolled across the lawn to the main house. Rosa was at the kitchen window. Rosa saw her coming, and Rosa did not, for once, come out to meet her. Rosa understood, with the particular intelligence of a woman who had worked in old houses for 40 years, that a guest leaving with a packed case did not want a goodbye in a kitchen with the rhubarb on the counter. Iris rolled to the front of the main house. Augustus was in the study off the entry hall. The study door was open. He was at his desk with a pen and a stack of papers. He looked up when she came in. His face went very still. Augustus? I am. What? He did not move. He did not put his palm on the desk. He did not stand up. He set the pen down very gently, and he closed his eyes for one long second. And he opened them, and he looked at her, and he said, "Tell me what you know." "I know that you recommended me through a broker named Hammond in February. I know that you paid him a sourcing fee. I know that Hammond gave my name to the Wexley Patron House under instruction. I know that the Patron House ratified the recommendation without knowing whose recommendation it was. I know that the entire—" She stopped. "I know that the entire chain of the last 12 weeks has its origin in a $14,000 broker fee written from your office on the 22nd floor of the Wexley Hotel." Iris. Iris. Augustus. Was it true? Why? Because I had seen your work in a Forbes profile in October. Because the cover piece was a Saint-Hilaire period revival ring. Because I had a deal that needed the right designer for a keynote. Because Then meet me, as yourself, with a phone call, with a request through the front door of my studio. Why? He told her that he had been afraid. He had been afraid that if he had called her as himself, she would have refused him on account of the photograph that would have been taken if he had called her as himself. He had been afraid, he said, that the moment he called her under his own name, the only conversation they could ever have would be a conversation about what calling her under his own name had done to her. He had told himself the broker was a way of giving her the work without giving her him. He had told himself it was a courtesy. He had told himself, he said, a great many things. He saw now what it looked like from where she was sitting. "It looks," he said carefully, "like the photograph was already in the room before either of us was." She did not answer. Iris. He told her then, in the steady voice of a man who had stopped composing, that he would not ask her to stay, and would not ask her to forgive him. He told her what he had done with the broker had been wrong, that he had known at the time it was wrong, that he had told himself a kinder name for it, and that the kinder name had been the largest thing he had lied to himself about in 11 years. He told her further that what had happened between them in the house in the last 14 days had had nothing to do with the broker, and that she had every right not to believe him, and that the rightness of her disbelief was, today, his problem and not hers. Augustus. She did not cry. She had not, in 8 years, learned how to cry in front of a man, and she would not now learn it in his study. She put her hand on the leather folder in her lap. She turned her chair. She rolled to the door. Augustus. The fact is, this was not a thing I was prepared to be wrong about. I have to leave. I know. The apology was not, when she let it out of herself, The apology she had spent 8 years constructing for the men who had not known how to be in a room with her chair. It was the smaller apology of a woman leaving a kitchen she had been allowed into. She was sorry to Rosa for the rhubarb she would not eat the second time. She was sorry to the bird on the carriage house sill for the morning light it would catch tomorrow, with no one in the room to see it. She was sorry to the kitchen of the main house, and to the 4 places Rosa had laid at the long, pale oak table. She was even, in a small and reluctant corner of her own thinking, sorry to the man in front of her, who had told her the truth when she had asked for it, and who had not, in the asking, made her ask twice. She was not sorry for leaving. The leaving was the only honest sentence available to her body that morning. She was sorry only for the rooms that had been honest with her, and would not, after the leaving, have her in them again. "You owe me nothing." She rolled out through the entry hall. Rosa was at the front door. Rosa had her coat. Rosa had her case. Rosa had called Mara from the kitchen at 10:05, and the town car was already at the gate. Rosa did not say anything. Rosa put one hand on Iris's shoulder for half a second, and then took it away. And Iris understood, going through the door, that Rosa had known about Hammond since February. The rain had stopped. The car door was open. Iris went into the car. Mara was already in the back seat. Mara did not speak. The car pulled away. The wisteria along the west elevation moved in the wind as they passed it. Iris did not look back. The bird in the folder pressed against her thigh through the leather all the way back to the city. Augustus Wexley held a press conference on Tuesday afternoon at 3. He did not hold it at the Wexley Hotel. He held it on the pavement outside the Saint-Hilaire, in the rain, without an umbrella, with the architect Kessler at his left shoulder and no one from the patron house at his right. He read from a single sheet of paper. He said that the Wexley Hospitality Group was, as of that morning, withdrawing from the acquisition of the Saint-Hilaire Hotel. He said the $80 million transaction would not close. He said the deposit, by the terms of the letter of intent, would be forfeit, and that the forfeit was being paid in full by him personally and not by the firm. He said the firm's board had been informed at 10 o'clock that morning and had registered its disagreement, and that he had registered in turn his decision. He said one further thing. He said that during the engagement of the designer of record on the 1923 lobby, an undisclosed broker fee had been paid by his office in February to secure the recommendation of the designer to the Wexley patron house, under conditions the designer had not been told about, and that the designer had only learned of the fee on the morning she left his employment in April. He said the fee had not, by any honest measure, compromised the designer's testimony to the Preservation Board, which had been, by Chair Pell's own description, the finest the board had heard in 19 years. He said the fee had, however, compromised him. He said that the firm could not, with that fee on the books, complete a transaction whose preservation rested on the work of the person the fee had been paid about. He said the withdrawal was his and not the firm's. He folded the paper. He did not take questions. He went into the lobby of the Saint-Hilaire out of the rain, and Kessler closed the doors behind him. The story ran on every desk in the city by 5. Mara forwarded it to Iris at 6:12. Iris read it once and set the phone screen down on the kitchen counter of her Brooklyn studio and did not move for a quarter of an hour. Theo Marchetti Wexley came to the studio on the morning of May the 30th. Iris had opened the new ground floor doors that day at 10. Mara had hung a small enamel plate beside the bell that read, "Iris Calloway, Goldsmith, hours by appointment." The plate was the color of a chalk green pencil case. Theo was 19. He came alone. He had his stepmother's careful jaw and his half-brother's eyes. He set on the counter a roll of architect's paper. "Mr. Marchetti Wexley. My stepmother asked me to bring this. She would have brought it. She thought, on balance, you would not let her in. She was correct. She told me to tell you that. She also told me to tell you that this is the original 1923 ironwork blueprint for the Saint-Hilaire West elevation. It has been held in our trust archive in Connecticut since 1956. It is not the firm's. It is hers personally. She has signed it over to you." Iris unrolled the paper. She put her thumb on the lower corner. The hand-pencil notation read, in a hand she recognized from the Massachusetts library notes, A.W., Draftsman of Record, July 1923. Beside it, in a newer hand, in green ink, 2 I. Calloway, with the apology of a woman who was afraid of the wrong thing. D. M. W. Iris read the note twice. Mr. Marchetti Wexley. She will want to know whether the terms were sufficient. All right. He hesitated at the door. He did not, like his stepmother, touch his ear. He put his right palm flat on the doorframe, which was the gesture of an entirely different man. And Iris understood, watching it, that the gesture was inherited, and that the inheritance had reached the only place it could reach. Theo. I know. I know that too. Mara told you. All right. He left. Iris stood at the counter for a long time, with her hand on the blueprint. She did not roll to the back of the studio. She did not light a candle. She did not call Mara. She picked up her phone at 11:10, and she wrote one message and sent it to one number, and put the phone screen down on the counter beside the carved wooden bird. The message read, Augustus, Friday in May. I am ready to be asked. He came to the Brooklyn studio that Friday at 5. He did not bring flowers. He did not bring a folder. He did not bring a speech. He came in a clean, dark coat, with the rain in his hair, and he stood on the threshold with his right palm flat on the doorframe, and he waited until Iris had set down the loop and turned the chair. Augustus. Come in. He came in. He closed the door. He took off the coat. He did not sit. He stood beside the bench with his right palm flat on the wood, and he looked at her without composing his face. Iris, he said, I am asking badly. I will ask once more, plainly. Will you allow me to court you on the terms you set, in the city you live in, with no broker between us, for as long as the terms hold? The terms are these. You will call at the front door of my studio. You will use your own name. You will not, ever, send anyone in advance of you. If I cannot meet you on a Friday, you will not be wounded by the Friday. If a column writes about us, we will not on its account change a single small thing about the week the column belonged to. And when, on some Friday I do not yet know, you ask me to dance, you will ask me as I am, in the chair I am in, on the floor I am on, hand to hand. You will not carry me unless I ask. If I ask, you will. Iris. I accept them. He held out his right hand, palm up, across the bench. Iris Calloway. On a Friday in May, in a Brooklyn studio, would you do me the honor? She set her hand in his. She did not look away. The rain held against the studio glass for a long minute. The radio in the back of the studio, which Mara had left on at low volume since lunch, turned over from a news bulletin to a piece of music Iris had not chosen, and would not, later, remember the name of. He took one step forward, into the small, clear floor between the bench and the door, and he held her hand at the height a hand is held when two people are standing and one of them is sitting, and he moved, very slowly, in the steady 3-count of a waltz he had not danced in 22 years. Iris moved with him in the chair. She turned the wheels in the small quarter arcs she could turn them. He matched the quarter arcs. He did not lift her. He did not need to. The studio was 11 feet by 14 feet, and the floor was clean, and the bird on the windowsill caught the late river light through the glass, and the radio, by some private grace, did not change the song. They danced for the length of one piece of music. They did not say anything. At the end of it, he set her hand down on the arm of her chair, and he put his right palm flat on the back of her hand for 1 second, and then took it away. And Iris did not, then or later, decide what she felt about being not carried. She decided only that she had, for the first time in 8 years, been asked. The carved wooden bird sat on the windowsill of the Brooklyn studio for the rest of that summer. The chalk green head caught the river light at 6:12 every morning in June. In July, a small column appeared in a different city paper, noting that the goldsmith Iris Calloway had opened her ground floor doors to the public for the first time since 1998, and that on the third Friday of every month, she was known to receive a particular caller at 5, and that the caller, on the third Friday of every month, came on foot, in his own coat, under his own name, and rang the bell at the front door of the studio like any other man in the city of New York. The column did not mention a ballroom. It did not mention a staircase. It did not mention a carry. It did not need to. Iris had by then been asked. If you would like more stories like this, slow, careful, set in rooms that know how to keep a secret, subscribe to Platinum Diaries. New stories every week. I will be here, by the fire, when you come back.